2 years ago, this desert was silent. So silent that even the wind seemed unsure of its purpose. There were no roads carving lines through the sand, no transmission towers interrupting the skyline, no camps, no construction equipment, no sign of human presence. Just endless, empty desert stretching outward in all directions, like a pale gold ocean frozen in time. For decades, this place had been defined by what it lacked: water, people, vegetation, and value. But today, that very same desert has transformed into one of the most ambitious energy experiments ever undertaken by humankind, the Midong solar farm. Spread across a landmass twice the size of Manhattan, Midong is not just a collection of solar panels. It is an engineered sea of more than 7 million photovoltaic units, arranged with mathematical precision, reflecting sunlight and symmetrical patterns that look almost surreal from above. Under the scorching Xinjiang sun, these panels generate enough electricity each day to power a small country, turning what was once barren land into an engine of industrial strength. At first glance, Midong looks like another flashy Chinese mega project, the kind designed to grab headlines with big numbers, big scale, and even bigger ambitions. China, after all, has built railways across deserts, cities out of fishing villages, and bridges across seas. But the story of Midong goes far beyond engineering spectacle. Because this solar farm isn't just producing electricity, it's producing strategic power. Midong is one piece of a much larger puzzle, one that reveals how China is attempting to rewrite its energy destiny, and in doing so, reshape global geopolitics. For decades, China has lived with a weakness so deep and so severe that it shaped almost every foreign policy decision Beijing made. A weakness powerful enough to determine whether China would rise peacefully, remain vulnerable to external pressure, or even collapse under geopolitical stress. That weakness was energy, specifically dependence on foreign oil. China became the world's factories, but factories do not run on slogans or ambition. They run on fuel, and almost none of that fuel comes from China itself. Beijing has been forced to import more than 10 million barrels of oil per day, with the vast majority traveling through waters controlled not by China, but by the United States Navy. This reality has haunted Chinese leaders for decades. One blockade, one crisis, one political confrontation could choke off China's lifeline. And in the worst-case scenario, its economy could grind to a halt in a matter of weeks. The nightmare scenario is so often discussed within Chinese strategic circles that it has a name: the Malacca Dilemma. Imagine this: China launches a military operation, a crisis escalates, or diplomatic tensions peak. The United States doesn't need to deploy divisions of troops or unleash airstrikes. It doesn't need to shoot down aircraft or sink ships. All it needs to do is block a narrow stretch of water, the Strait of Malacca, only 2.7 kilometers wide at its narrowest point between Malaysia and Indonesia, through which nearly all of China's Middle Eastern oil imports pass. If the U.S. Navy shut down this route, even briefly, Chinese refineries would run dry, industrial output would plummet, factories would shut down, export revenues would collapse, and the economy, the beating heart of modern China, could be strangled without a single shot fired. This vulnerability is China's invisible Achilles heel, and China knows it. But here's the twist: China has a secret advantage that few people outside the energy world truly appreciate. Unlike the United States, Europe, or Japan, China does not run its electrical grid on oil or gas. Only 5% of its electricity comes from natural gas. Almost none comes from oil. Nearly all of China's electricity is generated domestically, from coal, hydropower, nuclear reactors, wind turbines, and increasingly solar farms like Midong. That means if foreign oil imports were suddenly cut off, China's electrical grid would continue running. Lights would stay on, servers would continue humming, cities would function. But the real problem, the critical pressure point, lies outside the power grid. In transportation, logistics, heavy industry, factories, truck fleets, buses, and heating systems that still depend on liquid fuels. Oil might not keep China's lights on, but it keeps China's economy moving. And so Beijing identified a single solution, a bold, simple, but unprecedented strategy: electrify everything. Move cars, buses, delivery fleets, industrial motors, heating systems, everything possible onto the electrical grid. Turn every oil-dependent activity into an electricity-dependent one, and then power that electricity domestically. China decided that instead of importing energy, it would simply import electrons from its own land. This strategy sounds deceptively straightforward, but in practice, it's revolutionary. It requires reshaping an entire civilization to run on electricity rather than fossil fuel. It requires re-engineering manufacturing, redesigning cities, transforming transportation, rebuilding industrial systems, and rewiring the economy. No country in history has attempted electrification at this scale. Not the United States, not Europe, not Japan. And yet China has already become the most electrified major economy on Earth. Electric and hybrid vehicles dominate new car sales. Nearly every major city operates electric bus networks. The world's largest high-speed rail system transports millions daily, all electric. Urban transit networks, last-mile delivery fleets, taxis, port equipment, mining vehicles. China is systematically shifting them from oil to electricity. Industrial heat pumps are replacing gas boilers. Factory motors are being upgraded to electric systems. By some estimates, China is electrifying sectors of its economy 5 to 10 times faster than the US or Europe. But this electrification wave came with a major problem: reliance on coal. For years, soaring electricity demand pushed China to burn even more coal, worsening pollution and undermining climate targets. To break this dependence, China needed a replacement energy source, one that was domestic, scalable, predictable, and geopolitically secure. So in 2021, China launched what may be the most aggressive renewable energy expansion in human history. This was not driven by environmental idealism. It was driven by strategic necessity. Beijing set strict renewable generation targets, injected $625 billion in credit lines, allocated land, fast-tracked permits, and synchronized national transmission planning. The result was an energy infrastructure boom unlike anything the world had ever seen. Solar farms spanning hundreds of square kilometers in the Gobi Desert, wind forests in Inner Mongolia stretching farther than the eye can see, offshore wind fields larger than entire European nations, hydropower stations carved into mountain ranges, ultra-high voltage power lines transmitting energy thousands of kilometers with minimal loss. In 2024 alone, China added more renewable energy capacity than Germany consumes in an entire year, more than the United States, Europe, and the rest of the world combined, and 2025 is projected to exceed even that. But the story of China's energy revolution doesn't end at its borders, because China isn't just building renewable energy capacity, it's building the global clean energy supply chain. China refines the world's lithium, it produces the world's graphite, it dominates rare earth materials critical for magnets, wind turbines, and electric motors. Chinese factories produce the majority of solar panels, battery cells, wind turbine components, grid transformers, and electric vehicles. China has positioned itself as the backbone of the global energy transition. And through the Belt and Road Initiative, China is exporting this energy ecosystem around the world. Solar farms in Pakistan, wind projects in Africa, power stations in Southeast Asia, transmission networks in the Middle East. China is building the energy infrastructure of dozens of nations, embedding its technology and standards deep into the global economy. Meanwhile, the United States, caught between political swings, changing administrations, competing interests, and policy reversals, has struggled to respond. One administration pushes green subsidies, the next imposes tariffs, another prioritizes domestic manufacturing, another promotes fossil fuels, another withdraws from climate agreements. This inconsistency creates uncertainty, slows investment, and prevents the US from mobilizing at the scale China has. This imbalance is driving a seismic shift in global power. What happens when the world's largest oil importer no longer needs oil? What happens when China's solar, wind, battery, and grid industries dominate global supply chains? What happens when China's energy system becomes immune to blockades, sanctions, or naval pressure? What happens when the US must rely on Chinese components to power its own energy transition? The Malacca Dilemma disappears. Taiwan becomes strategically more vulnerable. US leverage decreases. China's leverage increases. And the global balance of power shifts, perhaps permanently.
Because this is not just an energy story. It is a story about the future of world power. For 150 years, the nations that controlled energy, whether coal, oil, or gas, controlled geopolitics. Britain controlled coal, America controlled oil, and now, for the first time in modern history, energy dominance is shifting again. This time, not toward fossil fuels, but toward electrons, batteries, grids, renewables, minerals, and manufacturing. China is building a future where it is untouchable, economically, militarily, and strategically. A future where energy cannot be cut off, intercepted, or bargained away. A future where China's rise cannot be contained by naval power or resource control. And whether the United States rises to meet this moment or falls behind due to political division may determine the world order for the rest of the century. Because this time, the race isn't about oceans, it's about electrons. And electrons obey no borders.